Pablo.
Okay. Bueno, buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a este webinar titulado Nuevas formas de liderazgo para el escenario actual del sector energético, los líderes transpersonales. Quien les habla, mi nombre es Pablo Ferragut, estoy a cargo del área de gestión sostenible de ARPEL y voy a ser moderador de la sesión en el día de hoy. Es un placer para mí presentar hoy a nuestro disertante, John Knights, una eminencia en lo que refiere a coaching y liderazgo, con más de 20 años de experiencia en el mundo corporativo, en donde llegó a ocupar cargos de jerarquía, habiendo alcanzado la posición de VP de una empresa Fortune 500. Se ha desempeñado tanto en el sector energético como en otras áreas, también ha sido emprendedor en el área de sostenibilidad, para ya luego dedicarse a lo que de seguro lo apasiona y que sin dudas ha sido y es su propósito, ayudar a otras personas a ser mejores líderes. John es el autor principal del libro Leading Beyond Ego, liderando más allá del ego, y nos trae hoy el concepto de líderes transpersonales. Como saben, el sector energético se encuentra en un momento de grandes transformaciones y cambios de paradigma, impulsados por el cambio climático, el avance tecnológico y la necesidad de seguir abasteciendo de energía asequible e impulsando el desarrollo en todas las regiones del globo. No solo el sector energético, sino que la revolución en las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones, así como otras transformaciones necesarias que estamos viendo a nivel social, están generando cambios profundos en nuestra forma de interactuar y de hacer negocios. Los cambios de paradigma requieren lógicamente un cambio de mindset, un cambio de chip y, por consiguiente, nuevas formas de liderar, más flexibles, abiertas, inclusivas y conectadas con la sostenibilidad. John nos obligará hoy a realizar una introspección, a pensar en nuestros propósitos, en nuestras motivaciones y, en definitiva, cómo podemos ser mejores líderes en estos tiempos de cambio. Sin más introducción, voy a realizar un par de comentarios sobre la dinámica de la sesión para luego sí ya darle la palabra a John Knights. John, bueno, procederá a hacer su presentación ahora, la cual tendrá una duración aproximada de 30 minutos. Durante la misma se estarán realizando algunas encuestas dinámicas. Las mismas aparecerán en su pantalla y deberán votar la respuesta simplemente haciendo clic en el casillero correspondiente en su pantalla. El tiempo para contestar será de aproximadamente 30 segundos y luego de eso podrán ver los resultados en la pantalla. Dichas encuestas son simplemente un insumo para la charla que John estará dando, así que agradecemos contestarlas ya que no tienen más uso que ese. Por otra parte, luego de la charla dejaremos un espacio para algunas preguntas. Agradecemos que las mismas nos las envíen por la pestaña de preguntas y no por la herramienta de chat en la aplicación. Ustedes van a poder ver un espacio que dice preguntas, las realizan por ahí, seleccionaremos algunas de ellas y el resto será luego contestada por John vía correo electrónico en la medida de lo posible en los tiempos que eso lleve. Bueno, voy a pasar al inglés simplemente para darle la bienvenida a John Knights. John, welcome and thank you for accepting this invitation. I did the introduction. I've said a lot of nice things about you, so now the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and have an opportunity to speak to your members. So this is a very exciting time. What I'd like to do briefly to start with is explain what transpersonal leadership is, and then again briefly why it's important, particularly to the energy sector. And then I'll spend the rest of the time explaining how one can develop as a transpersonal leader. So hopefully you can see my screen now. So first of all, let me explain just briefly what transpersonal leadership is. It's a mixture of three intelligences: rational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. Rational intelligence is where we work on our business skills, our vision, our strategy, our structures, and our processes. Emotional intelligence is where we are thinking about our behaviors and how we control our emotions and how we relate to other people. And spiritual intelligence, which has nothing to do with religion or mysticism or anything like that, is about how we bring our values to a higher level of consciousness. So when we combine rational intelligence and emotional intelligence, that's when we get an enhancing performance. basically through engagement of people. When we combine rational intelligence and spiritual intelligence, that's where the ethics come from, becoming ethical. And then when we combine spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence, that's where the caring, the kindness, and the sustainability come from. And basically, transpersonal leadership is that little red triangle in the middle. Transpersonal leaders, and this is the only time I'm going to read what's on the board, if you like. Transpersonal leaders operate beyond their ego. They continue personal development and learning. They're radical, ethical, and authentic, while emotionally intelligent and caring. They create performance-enhancing and sustainable cultures. So as we all know, we're in a rapidly changing world. And if we think over the last 20 years or so, some of these words at the bottom or phrases at the bottom are the things that have really contributed to the change, particularly communication. The internet, mobile phones, the availability of information has been mind-boggling. And it's only increasing more rapidly as time goes on, but unfortunately not in a linear way. We've got a what we call, what everybody refers to as a VUCA world. And let me just read out something that about some of the strategic direction that we need to be thinking about. And I would be certainly not advising you on what strategies your individual company should follow, but there are a few things that are really important to be thinking about for the energy sector as I see it. Governments are lining up to be carbon neutral by 2050. Share prices of companies with climate sustaining technologies have soared. Share prices of traditional energy firms have tanked. Venture capital is moving into climate friendly companies. Right now, 85% of energy is from fossil fuels, and only 4% of global R&D is climate change related. Interestingly, that's just twice the amount of money that Amazon spend on R&D. So this change needs to be government led, but the private sector must play its part too. And it needs great leadership. It needs transpersonal leadership. What I'd like to do now is to go to our first poll. We're going to have about 5 or 6 polls during this session to get your views on various aspects. This is the first one. What do you feel will present the biggest leadership challenge for energy industry in your working lifetime? Multi-generational organizations, artificial intelligence, societal attitudes, globalization, or climate change? So the poll is now open. We keep the poll open for about a minute while you all vote. So I'm not sure.
John, I will tell you the results.
I can't read it, I'm afraid.
So, multi-generational organizations, 21%, artificial intelligence, 15%, societal attitudes, 18%, globalization, 7%, and climate change, 40%.
Okay, so that's clear, isn't it? Climate change is the big thing that's going to present the difference for the energy industry. Not a surprise, but very clear. And so I think that just adds to what I was saying before about the direction of things. So let's move on. So one of the things we first need to think about is this, something that was said by Leo Tolstoy in the 19th century. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. And this is very true of many leaders. Where we need to start, if we're going to change the world, which we need to do, we have to start with changing ourselves. And that's where transpersonal leadership comes in. I'm just going to show you briefly the journey that we take as a transpersonal leader. If we start on the left-hand side, we can see that we start with business and organizational skills, strategic thinking, vision, and direction. Most leaders have these things in spades if they're worth their salt. But what is more important as we go forward in this new fast-changing world is behaviors and leadership styles. It's about creating a performance-enhancing culture. How do we do that? Not all leaders are equipped to do that. And to do that, a leader must become very emotionally aware as well as being robust. And going to the advanced stage where we need to focus on values, ethics, and judgment, which is again going to be critical if we're going to get the trust of the people, not only who work with us, but work with all our stakeholders. And we need to look beyond our own ego, beyond what is good for us, for the greater good, and embedding that ethical culture. And that creates leaders who are radically and ethically authentic. And this is the transpersonal leadership that we need for the future. Looking at it in a slightly different way, these are the steps that we take on the journey to transpersonal leadership. There are 7 steps in the intermediate journey, and there's 10 steps in the advanced journey. And normally in a program for senior leaders, this will take between a year and 18 months. So let's see, what do we get in this intermediate level? First of all, we concentrate on raising awareness. Really important to understand ourselves better, to understand other people better. We need to learn to manage our emotions. We need to improve our leadership styles, our range of leadership styles, and create a performance-enhancing culture. And the outcome is we get sustained performance improvement. However, this intermediate level is not enough by itself, because with emotional intelligence, people can still be and sometimes are very manipulative. We want to exclude that. And the only way to do that is by improving people's consciousness and raising values to full consciousness, and managing the ego, improving judgment and decision making, and creating ethical cultures. In that way, we create a radical, ethical, authentic leader that's for the greater good. And this must be our focus. So let's look in a little bit more detail at the intermediate level. The first thing is awareness. Let's look at ourselves in the mirror. Basically, we were born the same as a baby from the Stone Age. It's only our environment since we were born that creates us into a different person today than we would have done then, where we were just in survival mode. But our brain, our default brain, is very much designed for that Stone Age life, not for modern life. So what happens is, as we spend time with our parents, as we're educated at school, as we learn when we're adults, our brain is rewiring all the time to adjust to the environment. That's how we get experience. But the thing is that is largely by chance. You know, who your parents are, where you managed to go to school, which country you're born in, where you managed to get a job. etc., etc. So what we want to do instead is to give people the power to rewire their own brains in the way that they want to do it proactively, and to accelerate that learning and development. And in this way, we can address much of the awareness of understanding our senses and our behaviors, etc., etc. Let's just look quickly at our brain. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that our senses stimulate the thalamus. That's one part of the brain. And what the brain wants to do as a default is go through that short, fast route to the amygdala, the ancient brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain. And that provides an emotional response. So often that is anger, sadness, happiness, or surprise, etc., etc. But often what it does is it provides a very quick response, no time to think. So what we need to learn to do is to learn to use our prefrontal cortex, which is sort of more or less unique to humans and has developed over the millennia. And that gives us the opportunity to be more rational about how we handle our emotions, our senses to create our emotions. And further, if we can use the hippocampus, that's where our memories are embedded, which also help us to be more circumspect about how we're going to react. So this process is a bit like learning to drive a car. The first time we try to make these changes, it's very difficult, but we can practice and we can learn to manage our emotions much more effectively. And that is so important if we're going to engage our people and get their trust. Emotional intelligence is basically 4 competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And within that, there are 19 capabilities. And within those capabilities, there are 72 granular behaviors. So if we want to be perfect at emotional intelligence, we need to be good at those 72 granular behaviors. More easily said than done. Today, I'm just going to focus on one: empathy, which is perhaps one of the most important. And that will just be as an example. So let's look at the empathy cycle. The first step in this granular behaviors is to listen attentively. I think most people on the call today will know that listening attentively is very important when we're communicating with people. But what is done less often is to demonstrate our awareness of people's feelings. In other words, to feedback that we've heard them and we understand where they're coming from. And the third is to identify the cause of the perspective. In other words, why are they saying what they're saying? What's the background of that? And then the fourth is to feedback that we've understood their perspective. This is the cycle. It's really important. And the feeding back is the bit that we usually as human beings forget about. We assume because we've listened that people know that we've heard. And that's not true. So we need to be more proactive. And in fact, this demonstrate awareness of feelings is the #1, in all our research, is the #1 development need of all leaders. And remember, empathy is not sympathy, and it's not about agreeing. It's about understanding. So that's just one of the 19 capabilities. Now let's move on to leadership styles. There are fundamentally 6 leadership styles. We use the Goleman and Boyatz's definitions, which are very, very good. Now the reality is that in the private sector and in the public sector, the most common leadership styles are the commanding and the pace setting. And often these are dissonant styles. They're not good styles. We use them too much. What we should be using more is the visionary style, the coaching style, democratic style. When I say democratic style, I don't mean one person, one vote, as they're doing in America today, but I mean giving people a voice, letting them be heard, letting them feel that they've been heard. Now, most of us are good naturally at one style. Some people are good at 2 styles. Very few people are naturally good at all 6 styles. But if you're going to be a great leader, you need to be good at those 6 styles. And the only way to learn to be good at those 6 styles is by learning the granular behaviors that relate to each style. There's usually about between 12 and 16 granular behaviors that relate to each style. We don't have time to go through that today, but there'll be plenty of opportunity to follow up on that. So this is a key thing. Learn not only to use these styles, but also when to use these styles. Very important. And then from the styles, the leadership styles, we have to create the performance enhancing culture. As a leader, we need to create the climate. That's being the role model. That's setting the scene, showing the values, doing what you say you'll do. And getting the employees to see that what is expected, and through that they create the culture and the organizational performance. And one of the key things here is about getting engagement. And the way we get the organizational performance through the culture is by people providing discretionary effort. That's the key. That's the key to engagement. How do you get people to provide discretionary effort? In other words, they do more than they have to do because they want to, because they feel they belong. That is a key to leadership. And the coaching style is really critical for that. If we look at culture, we split this into 4 parameters: power, structure, achievement, support. This, based on all our research, is what is ideal. People want to focus on achievement and second, support, with much less power and structure. The problem is that in our current organizations today, power is usually the number 1 parameter, the highest, structure number 2, and followed by achievement and then support. So we need to change this around. How do we lower power, lower structure, increase achievement, and increase support? That's the secret to improving our cultures. So now let's move on to the advanced level. This is what we've created, this 8 integral competences of leadership, which is the complete picture of what leadership is about. But in the advanced level, we focus on the spiritual intelligence, personal conscience, and self-determination. Personal conscience is about who I am. Self-determination, and perhaps the most important leadership competency, is about what I'm going to do with who I am. The action. What do I do with who I am? And bringing these values to full consciousness, these are a list of the most common perceived personal conscience values for leaders. You'll see some of them are pretty expected, like trustworthiness, truth and honesty, excellence, integrity. But some of the softer values are also critical: humility, vulnerability, altruistic love, forgiveness. These are all equally important if you're going to be a great leader. And the self-determination values. This is what we do with who we are. These are important. Which are your strengths? So moving on, what drives you? What are your drivers? We're going to have poll number 2 now. So I want to understand, what are the main drivers of your ego? Remember, all this polling is anonymous. So don't worry, nobody knows what you're going to say, but please be as honest as you can. Is it power? The need for control? Is it prestige? Admired or respected for your achievements? Is it recognition? The acclaim and praise of one's achievements? Or is it financial reward or material reward? Quickly click one of these. Thank you. Just a few more seconds.
Ten more seconds to vote. 10 segundos más. Well, the results shown: power,
Okay.
10%, prestige, 30%, recognition, 47%, and reward, 14%.
So that's really interesting. Amongst the audience here, we've got a situation that where power and reward, which are the typical score the highest, that prestige and recognition are the most popular here. And I think you know, it's first of all very important that we identify which are the ones that are important for us. And I must say that during my career, it's probably changed. In the beginning, when I was younger, it might have been reward, and then it moved to power, and now it's probably recognition. But what's important is that we're aware of what is driving our ego. There's nothing wrong with having an ego in itself, but unless we are aware of what drives it, we can't manage it. So when we look at leading beyond our ego, we can either be ego-based and think of our own self, our own benefit, and what's good for us. Or as a leader, and remember, our organization, whoever it is paying us to be a leader. So our first call should be towards that organization and how we balance that. So to be a transpersonal leadership is about managing your own ego so that you can work for the benefit not only of the organization itself, but the organization's stakeholders. So if we look here, we see that there are 5 stakeholders that we've listed. I'd like to have listed more, but the system just allows us 5 here. So the question here is, who is the most important stakeholder in your business today? Not in the future, but today. So I'd like you to answer that right away, please.
$20 seconds to go. 20 segundos más para votar. John, the results.
Yeah.
Shareholders, 21%, senior executives, 10%, staff employees, 23%, the planet community, 21%, and customers, 25%.
Customers, 25%. So apart from senior executives, that's pretty equal across the board. So before I comment too much, let's look at the next poll, which you're going to do right away, which is who needs to be the most important stakeholder in your business for success in the future? So now we're looking forward in the future. Which which is the stakeholder that is the most important for success in the future? Okay, shall we start, please?
$15 seconds to go. 15 segundos más para votar. Well, the results: shareholders 5%, senior executives 5%, staff employees 18%, customers 26%, and the planet community 46%. It looks like we have to rewire, Sean.
Absolutely. Well, nothing. We couldn't have. As long as we're not doing fake news, I think that that poll just tells its own story, doesn't it? That the community and the planet have more than doubled its percentage of what's needed for the future. Customers stay about the same, which is good. Staff and employees go down slightly as a percentage, and the ones that are really hit is the shareholders, from 21 to 5%. So that's a message for that's really a message for everybody. Okay, let's move on. I want to get now to judgment and decision making. One of the things that we are brought up to do is to think rationally and logically. We are taught this from school, we're taught this at university, we're taught this in business. Think logically. The reality is that most of the decisions we make are done unconsciously, and then we use our rational logic to explain them, except purely analytical questions. But most questions that leaders face, most decisions that leaders face, are more complex than just analytical. And therefore, we have to think about the unconscious processes that are going on in our brain, of which there are 4. There's intuition, instinct, insight, and ethical philosophy. And I'm just going to say very briefly a little bit about each of them. Intuition is based on our experiences, the experiences of life. That's intuition. Instinct is based on our innate selves, our DNA. Perhaps you could say that our ancestors' experience. Insight is when we get a voluntary impulse that's that comes all of a sudden, based on something that's happened to us. And then ethical philosophy is, what is our ethical approach to things? And there are 3 fundamentals in ethical philosophy. One is to be based, our decision making to be based on integrity, what is right. The second is to do it because of our social conscience. In other words, what we do because of people. And the third is because it's the rules. And each of us have a preference. We don't have time to do any experiments today, but if I get the opportunity to work with you in the future, we can certainly do some experiments to test this. But the important thing here is that most of our decision making is subconscious. We need to bring this to a higher level of consciousness so we understand fundamentally the cause of our decision making. That will make our decisions much better and enable us to use our rational logic much more effectively, rather than doing everything in a subconscious or unconscious zone. One of the final things I want to mention is purpose. To be a leader, we have to have purpose. And our purpose has to be aligned with our organization if it's to be effective, if we can be ethical, if we can be honest, if we can have integrity. So if our purpose is not aligned with that of the organization, then we have basically two options if we're going to be transpersonal. One is to help that organization to change its purpose, or the second is to go somewhere else where your purpose is aligned, or to continue and to be unhappy. And purpose is at the pinnacle. We've gone through the behaviors, we've gone through beliefs and values, we've gone through who am I, but this is the purpose, why? So just look at this for a moment. Check against this where your purpose is. I have a broader reason for my actions than the actions themselves. Maybe give yourself a score from 1 to 5 according to this scale here. The direction I take is consistent with my values. I think strategically about my life and what is to be achieved for the greater good. I understand my goals in life and the purpose it represents. We're going to be, this is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube, so you'll be able to revisit this again if you're interested in doing so. So this is poll number 4. Do you have a purpose? Please answer whichever fits where you are in your life and your thinking. Thank you.
$15 seconds to go. 15 segundos más para contestar. Well, the answers, John.
Okay.
I have clearly defined a purpose for myself, 38%. I have a purpose, but not clearly defined, 36%. I know I need to develop a purpose, 19%. I have never thought about developing a purpose, 4%. And I think developing a purpose is pointless, 3%.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. I think we've got a self-selecting audience here because usually the percentage, those first two are usually lower than that when we look at the a broader base. So that's very good. I'd certainly like to speak to the 3% at some point in time and understand why they think it's pointless, because their voice should be heard as well. Okay, let's move on. And the final thing I just want to talk about, we've done a few quick dips into various aspects of transpersonal leadership. This is the last one. It's about creating a touchstone. When you're going to make a serious decision, then this touchstone can be very useful to give you a guide to make sure that you're following your values. The transpersonal qualities are on the right-hand side, so you can actually think about when you're making an important decision. Is it caring? Is it radical? In other words, is it different? Is it ethical? Is it authentic? Is it sustainable? Is it emotionally intelligent? Is it performance enhancing? And then you can set aside this touchstone towards what are important values for you. This example is what are the key values for me. I've used my own values in this particular case, but you might have different ones. Some of them are natural to me. Some of them are ones that I aspire to. So as we end this session, I'd just like to remind you of Professor Dumbledore of Harry Potter fame. It is our choices that show us what we truly are, far more than our abilities. And that is so true. So for our last poll, I just want to, or we just want to find out, what is the age balance of this audience? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sean. And while people is answering this final poll, well, I'm going to ask you some questions that people is asking via the system. And I would like to invite people to ask more questions, and maybe we cannot address them now, but well, John is going to make time and answer them via email.
So we should have given people enough time to know what their age is by now.
No, it's okay. It's 15 seconds.
Okay.
So 15 segundos más para contestar. Una sola aclaración: si quieren hacer las preguntas en español, lo pueden hacer. Que no sea eso una barrera. Well, the answer, John, between 20 and 30, 3%. 31 and 40, 26%. 41 and 50, 40%. 51 and 60, 15%, and more than 61, 17%.
Okay. Okay, so we got a good spread, quite a good spread there, but it's primarily in the 30 to 50 age. So many of those people are going to be aspiring leaders. So this is great that people who have plenty of future, have an opportunity, are interested in this kind of subject. I think that's really good. Thank you for that. So just on the final slide then, which I'll leave up while we answer questions if you like. I just mentioned that if you're really interested in this subject, then Leading Beyond the Ego is available on Amazon in a Kindle version as well as a soft copy. There are a live podcast that you can go to get more information about various topics, and we have a number of white papers. The links, if you don't have time to take down the links now, they'll be available when the recording is available. And if you want to contact me, then probably the easiest way is on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with all of you. Thank you.
That's it. If people wants to reach you, you are available there. Here is the contact. Well, yeah. Let's do some questions. The first thing is you talked a lot about rewiring, and that people and leaders need to have a purpose. So what about organizations? They need to rewire, they need a purpose. How do they should train their own and future leaders? We have 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to ask 2 or 3 more questions from the audience.
Well, a number of our clients will provide for their either current top leaders or their next level of leaders to go through a program where they learn to raise their awareness. And this can either be done on a one-to-one basis, or it can be done in a cohort. And of course, in today's world where we have to do everything pretty much remotely, we've been working remotely for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And in fact, 80% of our business was remote last year before COVID. So it's in sort of, I would say that the rewiring the brain is done in 4 stages. First of all, it's about getting content. It's about getting some content, knowing what you need to do. And then the second stage is discussing it, either through a coaching or a facilitation exercise to discuss what your issues are, what the difficulties are, and so on and so forth. And that can include some assessments as well. And then the third thing is practicing in the workplace. It's not all about lectures and taking advice from people who've been through it before, but it's about practicing. It's like learning to drive a car. And so when you've practiced, then you come back and then you discuss not what you succeeded in doing, but what you learned. And then you learn more and you go back. So it's very much about going through that cycle of getting a little bit of knowledge, discussing it, reflecting on it, practicing it, reflecting on it again. That's the methodology. And we do that for each of the 17 steps. So I hope that gives an idea of how we go about it.
Okay, just another question on this line. What are the most common barriers you have found during your journey to convince current leadership that this is the best way of training?
Okay, so some of there's a couple of barriers. One is that when leaders get to the top of the organizations, they kind of, in one way, they're in a comfort zone. They want to maintain the status quo. They don't want to change. It may be because they think they're smart enough to get there, so they can be smart enough to stay there. But in my experience, more leaders are good at getting to the top, in other words, knowing how to get to the top, than they are when they actually get there. So we have to change the system in order to make sure that we identify the future leaders who are the right type of person. And the first thing we should be looking at are values, not experience and qualifications, which are important, but they're not as important as values. If people don't have the right values, they shouldn't get on the ladder. That's the way of the future. And so that's one of the biggest barriers. The other real barrier is inner self-confidence. There are many people who have a lot of capability to be good leaders, but they just don't have the self-confidence. And there are many ways to help people to gain that self-confidence.
Okay, let's put a gender perspective on transpersonal leadership.
Yes.
So, do you feel that women are better transpersonal leaders?
Okay, that's
there's another one on this line that says something like this. It says that many of the characteristics you mentioned are common in women. Why are not so many women in leadership? So
yeah, now that's a very good question, and I think that in our research, where we've studied the 19 capabilities I spoke about in emotional intelligence, women have a higher score in overall on average on 15 of those 19. So I would say that for today's leaders, for the 21st century, actually women are overall better prepared to become the leaders. It's just that we are in a male society that is still resists that. And I think one of the reasons for that is that men need to learn some of the traits that women are more naturally good at if they're going to be excellent leaders in the 21st century. So, I'm all in favor of more women. I think we need a balance. So we don't want to go from 100% men to 100% women, but we certainly do need to go to, 50-50, 60-40 type of thing. And I think the way that if we look at the countries that have done best in the COVID situation, it is primarily countries that are led by women, both in Asia, New Zealand, and in Europe.
Okay, thank you. We need to rewire that.
Yes, both the men and the women. The one thing that women, though, the one thing that always comes up with women that provide a difficulty, and sometimes the sort of that glass ceiling is not an external one, but an internal one, is inner self-confidence. And men can be a much more self-arrogant about their capability, whereas women tend to be more reserved about their capability. And while that is good in one way, it can be a negative, it can be a barrier. And so women have to learn to show their self-confidence in a way that is not aggressive, but shows that they have that inner self-confidence, that they're happy with who they are as human beings. And that's critical for all of us, of course. But I think it's particularly important for women. And what we find is that when we work with women and we help them to identify what other people think about them, it's usually a lot higher than they think about themselves.
Okay, well, another question about the barriers, how the environment, the structure of the organization, and the systemic environment, I mean, the larger environment, the industry, the business environment, influence on this, on leadership, and on this rewiring we are talking today.
Yeah, I mean, it is a barrier. And I think that we have to change some of these systems fundamentally. And I think it's not I mean, our focus at Leadershape at the moment up until now has been primarily about developing individual leaders in organizations. But I think that if we're going to change the system, then we have to bring this kind of leadership development, first of all, into the universities. I mean, every student studying should learn some of this stuff. It's not rocket science, but it's not done. And so that's number one. So I think, and that's one thing that we're trying to do now is to help and work with universities to bring this kind of thinking into their normal undergraduate and graduate programs. But ultimately, we have to bring this stuff into the schools, right at the foundation level, the primary schools, 4 or 5-year-olds. They have not at the same level of complication, of course, but focusing on social skills, community, values, and they should be an emotional intelligence, and they should be at the same level of importance, in my view, as reading and writing and arithmetic. And then we can start to change the system long term. But that's a generation's work.
Okay, maybe the challenge for our and the next generation. One last question, and I will apologize with all the people that ask lots of questions that cannot be answered today, but well, this is what will be the necessary characteristics for a good leader within the energy industry now, and how are these characteristics being evolving during time?
Oh wow, that's a a very difficult question.
That's question difficult
but,
one.
I mean, I think that the most important thing at this point in time, I think, has to be vision. They have to see how the world is changing, and they have to set a direction, whatever organization they're in. It's not about, first of all, what you do tomorrow in the short term, although that's important. It's about seeing about where the world's going and where your organization could be in 20 years' time, and then working backwards, and then engaging with your staff, with all your people. Get them involved in providing the solution. Don't think that you, as the leader or as a leader, should have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. It doesn't even matter if you don't have any of the answers. What is important for a visionary leader is to be able to collect all the input, all the ideas, and then get the people behind it and get them involved. And that way, you will not only get the belief and you'll get the people to stay with you because they will feel they belong, but they will also put in that discretionary effort to enable you to reach those longer-term goals.
Okay, well, thank you, John. We don't have more time for any questions, so I apologize again. We are going to answer them via email.
Sure.
Thank you for your time, for your excellent webinar. There is a lot to learn, a lot to rewire, a lot of things that we have to think about. And I think that the final thing you said, we have to think where we as an industry, in particular the oil and gas industry and oil and gas companies want to be in 20 years, and how to reach that, engaging people and finding the best leaders and putting the focus on values
Yeah.
and sustainability.
And we have to cooperate. We have to cooperate. We have to start stopping thinking too much about being competitive, but cooperate. How can we work together? That's going to help us to find the solutions too, I think.
Okay, well, there too much things to continue speaking. We have no more time. Thank you again, John. Thank you
You're
to
very
all the
welcome.
audience.
Thank you.
Gracias
Thank you.
a toda la audiencia. Y bueno, supongo que vamos a tener más oportunidades como esta de hablar más de liderazgo y de otras cosas no tan concentradas en la energía, en el sector energético como la planificación energética, el negocio, sino en el liderazgo y las habilidades blandas que se necesitan para lograr tener empresas exitosas. Así que nuevamente muchas gracias a todos, muchas gracias a John. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank
See
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.